In October of 2023, a river in northern Brazil dropped to its lowest level in over a century. And when the water pulled back, it revealed faces carved into stone, staring up at the sky for the first time in over a decade, put there by hands that vanished from history 1,000 years before Columbus ever left Spain. That is not an isolated incident. That is the Amazon doing what it has always done, hiding things, and then, without warning, giving them back. For centuries, this rainforest was written off as an empty green wall, too hostile, too poor in soil, too dangerous to have ever supported anything but scattered, wandering bands of people. Explorers went in looking for lost cities of gold and came out with nothing but fever and grief. Scientists dismissed the whole idea as fantasy. They were wrong. Over the last 2 decades, the proof has arrived in waves, from lasers mounted on helicopters, from droughts that exposed the riverbed, from DNA samples pulled off animals that had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. What follows are 15 of the discoveries that forced that reckoning, the ones that made scientists, explorers, and entire governments look at the Amazon again and realize they'd been standing on top of something the whole time. Number 15. The fungus that turns ants into puppets. Deep in the leaf litter of the rainforest floor lives a parasite called Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. And researchers who study it have a much simpler nickname for what it does. Zombification. A microscopic spore lands on a foraging ant and burrows through its exoskeleton. Once inside, the fungus doesn't kill its host right away. It takes over. Scientists have found that it infiltrates the ant's muscle tissue and steers the ant's movements from the outside, without ever touching the brain directly. The infected ant abandons its colony, climbs to a precise height in the vegetation, and clamps its jaws onto a leaf vein in what researchers call a death grip. Then it dies exactly where the fungus needs it to, so a stalk can grow out of its head and rain spores down onto the ants below. It has been happening in these forests for millions of years, and it is happening again tonight, in the dark, on a leaf, near whoever happens to be standing under that tree. But manipulation is one thing. Number 14 is about walking into the pain yourself, willingly. Number 14. The glove that grown men have to be talked into wearing more than once. In the Brazilian Amazon, the satyr, Fey people have a rite of passage built around the most notorious insect sting on the planet. The bullet ant, Parapanera clavata, sits at the very top of the entomologist's official pain scale, tied for first place with the tarantula hawk wasp, and researchers who study its sting describe it in terms usually reserved for gunshot wounds. For the ritual, elders anesthetize dozens of bullet ants in an herbal solution, then weave them, still unconscious, into a glove made of woven palm fiber, stingers pointed inward. When the ants wake up, a young man slides his hand inside and keeps it there for several minutes at a stretch, while ant after ant delivers its sting. The physical toll is well documented: uncontrollable shaking, temporary paralysis, and pain that researchers say can radiate through the whole limb for 24 hours afterward. And here is the detail that turns this from a stunt into a genuine rite of passage, to be recognized as a man by the tribe. You have to do it again, multiple times, across years, without ever letting your face show how much it hurts. Which, compared to number 13, might actually be the safer option. Number 13. The fish Amazon River guides warn you about before they mention anything else, including the piranhas. It is called the Candiru, a parasitic freshwater catfish barely the size of a toothpick. And for nearly 200 years, it has carried a reputation no other fish on Earth has to live with. The claim that it can swim directly into the human body. According to the legend, the Candiru is drawn to the scent of urine and can dart upstream into a person while they're standing in the water. anchoring itself in place with backward, facing spines that make it almost impossible to remove without surgery. Here is what researchers actually know. The Candiru is real, and it genuinely does swim into the gills of larger fish to feed on their blood. That part isn't in question. But when scientists went looking for solid evidence of attacks on humans, they found almost nothing. In 2 centuries, there is exactly one widely cited case of a Candiru being surgically removed from a person, reported in Brazil in 1997, and biologists who've reviewed the details still call the story questionable at best. So, is it a genuine threat, or the Amazon's oldest urban legend? Even the scientists can't fully agree. What they do agree on is number 12, because that one isn't up for debate. Number 12. The beach that piranhas took back in a single afternoon. At a resort beach in Manacapuru, Brazil, tourists were wading in the shallows when the bites started, spreading across the water through the day. A 7-month-old baby lost part of a toe. Adults waded out with open cuts along their legs and feet, and local firefighters spent hours treating people on the sand while officials ordered everyone else out of the water. It sounds like the setup for a horror film, but biologists who reviewed the incident offered a more grounded explanation. This wasn't predatory hunting behavior. One aquatic ecologist explained that piranhas typically deliver a single warning bite to drive an intruder away from a nesting site rather than sustained attacks. The real problem, researchers pointed out, wasn't the fish. It was a resort built directly on top of piranha spawning grounds, with tourists unknowingly wading straight into a nursery the fish were willing to defend. City officials shut the beach down until, in their words, the fish dispersed. It is a reminder that in the Amazon, the water doesn't need a monster in it to hurt you. Number 11 proves that sometimes it isn't even an animal you need to worry about. Number 11. The poison that leaves you fully conscious while your body shuts down around you. For generations, Amazonian hunters perfected a substance European explorers could barely believe existed: curare, a thick, dark paste boiled down from a mixture of rainforest vines and bark, applied to the tips of blowgun darts and arrows. A single dart fired into a monkey high in the canopy would bring the animal down within minutes, not through blood loss, but through paralysis, as the poison severed the connection between nerve and muscle one fiber at a time. When the English naturalist Charles Waterton brought a sample back to Europe in the early 1800s, he ran an experiment that still unsettles people who read about it today. He poisoned a donkey with curare until it collapsed, and by every visible sign appeared to be dead. Then, through a hole cut into its windpipe, he pumped air into its lungs by hand for hours. The donkey survived. It lived for another 25 years. That single experiment planted the idea that would eventually reshape modern surgery, that a person's muscles, including the ones that let them breathe, could be completely shut down while their mind stayed fully intact, as long as something else kept the air moving. Descendants of that same jungle poison are still used in operating rooms today, every single day, somewhere between a hunting tool and a medical breakthrough. Though the Amazon also produces things that never got a tidy scientific explanation at all. Which brings us to number 10. Number 10. The dolphin the Amazon insists is not just a dolphin. The Amazon River dolphin, known locally as the boto, is already strange enough as an animal on its own. Pink, skinned, nearly blind. Gliding through flooded forests, no ocean dolphin could ever navigate. But along the riverbanks, it carries a second reputation that has nothing to do with biology. According to generations of local folklore, the boto is encantado, enchanted. At night, the story goes, it climbs out of the water, sheds its dolphin body, and walks into town as a strikingly handsome man in white. Hat worn low to hide the one part of the disguise that never quite changes. It shows up at parties seduces someone before sunrise, and slips back into the river before anyone can follow. This isn't treated as a story told to scare children. In many riverside communities, it is invoked as a genuine social explanation, offered up for unexplained pregnancies and disappearances alike, and taken with real caution rather than a laugh. The boto, at least, is a real animal wrapped in a legend. Number 9 might be an animal that is real, dressed up as a legend. Nobody's entirely sure which. Number 9. The creature a credentialed scientist took seriously enough to go looking for. Across the Amazon, rubber tappers and indigenous hunters describe an enormous, foul-smelling creature that walks upright, stands taller than a man, and announces itself with a scream loud enough to be mistaken for a jaguar from half a mile off. They call it the Mapinguari. Descriptions vary by region, but nearly every account agrees on one detail above the rest: the smell described as overpowering enough to cause nausea and disorientation before the animal is even seen. Most cryptid claims get dismissed by mainstream science without a second look. This one didn't entirely. In the 1990s, ornithologist David Oren spent years formally collecting sighting reports across the Amazon and proposed something startling in scientific journals under his own name, that the accounts might describe a surviving population of ground sloth, an animal believed to have gone extinct thousands of years ago. He wasn't claiming certainty. He was arguing the possibility deserved real investigation. No confirmed specimen has ever surfaced. No skeleton, no photograph that is held up to scrutiny. But when a working scientist stakes part of his professional reputation on the idea that a folk legend might describe something that isn't supposed to exist anymore, it is worth asking what made that risk feel worth taking. And the deeper this list goes, the harder that question gets to answer. Number 8. The photographs that proved a claim some officials didn't want proven. In 2008, a small aircraft flew low over one of the most remote stretches of rainforest on the Brazil-Peru border, carrying a Brazilian government researcher and a photographer on a mission to document something outsiders had long doubted: a community living with no contact with the outside world at all. What the camera caught became one of the most widely seen images ever taken in the Amazon: a cluster of thatched roof homes cut into a jungle clearing, and men with their bodies painted red and black, standing in the open, aiming bows and arrows straight up at the plane passing overhead. The photographs were released deliberately to counter public officials who had suggested uncontacted tribes were essentially invented to obstruct resource extraction in the region. The pictures ended that argument immediately. What they also revealed was how fragile that existence really is. These communities relocate every few years to stay clear of outsiders. They carry no immunity to diseases as ordinary as the common cold, meaning a single unwanted contact could devastate an entire group within one season. Investigators involved in the flights warned that illegal loggers pushing in from the Peruvian side were actively forcing isolated groups across the border, raising the risk of violent contact between communities that had never planned on meeting anyone at all. The tribe has since been sighted again on later flights. Still there, still isolated, still choosing the forest over the world beyond it. Whether that choice will still be possible a generation from now is a very different question, which is, in its own way, the same question hanging over number 7. Number 7. The faces the river only shows you when it is dying of thirst. In October of 2023, the Rio Negro, one of the Amazon's largest tributaries, dropped to its lowest level in 121 years. The cause was an extreme drought, worsened by El Niño and record ocean warming, and as the water pulled back meter after meter, it exposed something that hadn't been fully visible since a smaller drought back in 2010. An entire gallery of carvings cut directly into stone at a site called Ponto das Lajes, where the Rio Negro meets another major river. Among the carvings were faces, human faces, some with expressions still recognizable after all this time, along with animals, river currents, and smooth grooves in the rock that archaeologists believe were used to sharpen arrows and spears. Researchers estimated the carvings were somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 years old, made by people whose names and language are lost entirely, on a riverbank that spends most of its existence completely underwater. A resident who'd lived in the region for nearly 3 decades said she'd never seen anything like it in her life, and admitted the discovery felt less like a gift and more like a warning, since the only reason the faces were visible at all was that the river itself was disappearing faster than anyone in the region had ever witnessed. The Amazon had been hiding this one on purpose, protected by its own water. Number 6 was hidden by something far less forgiving, a wall of solid rainforest canopy. Number 6. The gallery of extinct animals painted by the first people who ever saw them alive. Deep in Colombia's Serran Fia de la Lindosa, part of the wider Chiribicate region, researchers documented a stretch of rock face, nearly 8 miles long, covered in tens of thousands of individual paintings. So many that scientists involved openly admitted it would take generations just to catalog them all. What made the find extraordinary wasn't only the scale, it was the subject matter. Alongside familiar animals like deer, birds, and monkeys, researchers identified paintings that appeared to depict creatures extinct in South America for well over 10,000 years. A giant ground sloth, roughly the size of a small car, a mastodon with an unmistakable trunk and tusks, camelid-like animals, and horses with the heavy wild features of an Ice Age species rather than anything alive today. Some paleontologists remain cautious about confirming every identification with certainty, since reading ancient art is never an exact science. But several of the images are detailed enough, down to the shape of a horse's face, that researchers involved called the resemblance too precise to be coincidence. If the identifications hold, it means the people who painted these walls weren't imagining monsters. They were recording their neighbors, animals that shared the forest with the very first humans to ever set foot in the Amazon basin, long before anyone had invented writing or a single permanent settlement anywhere else on the continent. And if people were already living this deep in the Amazon that early, watching creatures that size, it raises an obvious question. What else did those first arrivals leave behind, still waiting to be found? Number 5 has one answer. Number 5. The 20-foot predator that spent nearly 2 centuries hiding inside a case of mistaken identity. In 2022, a team led by biologist Brian Fry traveled into Ecuador's Amazon rainforest at the invitation of the Guarani people, who guided the scientists to a population of anacondas rumored to be among the largest anywhere on Earth. The expedition delivered almost immediately. The team encountered a female measuring over 20 feet long and weighing roughly 440 pounds, with local hunters describing individuals rumored to be even bigger. The real discovery, though, happened afterward, in a lab when researchers ran genetic testing on blood samples and found something nobody expected. These snakes weren't the same species as the green anaconda that had been documented since the 1800s. Despite looking almost identical to the naked eye, the DNA showed the two populations had been separated for nearly 10 million years, differing genetically by 5.5%. More than double the genetic difference between a human being and a chimpanzee. The new species was named Eunectes acaima, the northern green anaconda, and its formal identification meant that one of the largest, most recognizable predators on the planet had been hiding in plain sight for close to 200 years, misfiled under someone else's name the entire time. Researchers involved in the discovery called it the highlight of careers spent studying these animals. If a 20-foot snake can hide that successfully, imagine what an entire civilization could do. That is exactly what number 4 is about. Number 4. The lost civilization hiding under a landscape everyone assumed was empty. In the Llanos de Mojos region of the Bolivian Amazon, researchers spent decades slowly piecing together evidence of an ancient society called the Curare culture, which flourished roughly between the years 500 and 1400. On foot, progress was brutally slow. Seasonal flooding and dense vegetation made it almost impossible to map how individual sites connected or how large the civilization actually was. Then, in 2022, a research team led by archaeologist Heiko P.R. Famers took to the air with a laser-based scanning technology called LiDAR, mounted roughly 650 feet up, capable of digitally stripping away the forest canopy to reveal the ground beneath. What the scans exposed stunned even the researchers who'd spent careers studying the region, a dense four-tiered network of settlements, including 2 enormous urban centers, one spanning more than 300 hectares, connected by dead strait. Raised causeways stretching for miles, surrounded by canals, reservoirs, and stepped pyramid structures rising up to 70 feet tall. This wasn't a scattering of small villages. It was an interconnected regional civilization with sophisticated water management, ceremonial architecture aligned in the same direction across every site, and a population density that directly contradicted a century of assumptions that the Amazon could never have supported large-scale urban life. One researcher on the project described the discovery in a single word: mind-blowing. The Curare people built all of this, sustained it for nearly 1,000 years, and then, after European contact brought diseases the region had never encountered before, the civilization collapsed, and the forest reclaimed everything within a few generations, so completely that even the name the Curare called themselves has been lost to history. It is not the only Amazonian civilization that vanished that fast. It is not even the most famous one. That title belongs to number 3. Number 3. The explorer who staked his entire life on a city that swallowed him whole. By 1925, British explorer Percy Fawcett had already spent nearly 2 decades mapping remote stretches of the Amazon, surviving snakebite, starvation, and hostile encounters that had killed members of his earlier expeditions. He'd become convinced, based on historical documents and his own field observations, that a large, sophisticated civilization was hidden somewhere in the Brazilian interior, a place he referred to only as Zed. On the 20th of April of that year, Fawcett set out from the city of Curare with 2 companions, his 21-year-old son Jack and Jack's closest friend, Raleigh Ramel. Fawcett kept the expedition deliberately small and secretive, convinced that speed and discretion were the only way to succeed where every previous attempt had failed. He sent his final letters back to civilization with local guides at a camp he'd nicknamed Dead Horse Camp, then turned north into territory that, at the time, no outsider had ever mapped. He was never seen again. Neither was Jack. Neither was Ramel. What followed was one of the most extensive searches in the history of exploration. Expedition after expedition, funded by newspapers, universities, and obsessive amateurs, stretching across the better part of a century, and everyone came back empty. Rumors circulated for decades that Fawcett had been killed, that he'd gone mad and simply walked deeper into the forest on purpose, that he'd actually found what he was looking for and chosen never to come back. No trace of any of the 3 men has ever been confirmed. Here is what makes his disappearance almost unbearable in hindsight. Fawcett wasn't chasing a fantasy. A real civilization really was buried in that region, built by real people with real roads and real cities. He simply never found it because he was looking for the wrong kind of ruin. Number 2 is that civilization, the one Fawcett died searching for, sitting only a few hundred miles from where he vanished, waiting almost a full century to be found. Number 2. The buried answer to the question that killed Percy Fawcett. Roughly 80 years after Fawcett vanished, Anthropologist Michael Heckenberger began working alongside the Quicuro people in Brazil's Upper Xingu region descendants. It turned out, of the very civilization explorers had spent a century failing to find, guided by indigenous oral history that had preserved the memory of these places long after the forest swallowed them. Heckenberger's team began excavating a network of settlements, now known collectively as Kuhiku. What they uncovered rewrote the assumptions of an entire field. This wasn't a handful of isolated villages. It was a planned, interconnected network of what researchers now describe as garden cities, more than 20 settlements spread across roughly 7,000 square miles, arranged around large central plazas, laid out with careful geometric precision and linked by engineered roads up to 50 meters wide, some running dead straight for miles, complete with bridges and causeways over wetland terrain. The largest of these, the site now called Kuhiku itself, was protected by defensive ditches several meters deep and wooden palisade walls, ringing a settlement that may have housed several thousand people on its own. Researchers estimate tens of thousands once lived across the full network, farming manioc, tending orchards, engineering fish ponds, organizing a society Heckenberger has compared directly to classical Greece in its sophistication. And then it disappeared. Not through war and not through conquest, but through disease. European pathogens raced ahead of European explorers along indigenous trade networks, reaching populations that had never had direct contact with a single outsider. Cities were reduced by as much as 90% within decades. By the time explorers like Fawcett finally reached the region, all that remained were small, scattered communities, descendants of a civilization so thoroughly collapsed that newcomers assumed nothing had ever stood there to begin with. Fawcett died convinced a lost city was out there. He was right. He simply pictured it wrong, expecting stone temples and gold, when the truth was earthworks, canals and gardens engineered so precisely into the landscape that they were mistaken for wilderness for 500 years. Somewhere in the Upper Xingu, the ruins of the city Percy Fawcett gave his life searching for are still sitting exactly where they've always been. He walked past the truth without ever getting to see it. And the discovery holding the #1 spot proves this wasn't an isolated case. It happened again on a scale that puts even Kuhiku in the shade. Number 1. A lost civilization that is being discovered and destroyed at the exact same time, over and over again. In the late 1970s, in the Brazilian state of Acre, loggers and cattle ranchers began clearing sections of upland rainforest that had stood seemingly untouched for as long as anyone could remember. What the bulldozers exposed, cut directly into the bare earth, were massive geometric shapes, perfect circles, squares, and more complex forms combining both, some over 300 feet across, built from ditches up to 36 feet wide and 13 feet deep. Archaeologists called them geoglyphs, and at first, researchers assumed they'd stumbled onto a handful of unusual, isolated sites. They were wrong by an almost unbelievable margin. As deforestation continued stripping away the forest canopy over the following decades, more and more geoglyphs kept appearing. Not dozens, but hundreds. The current count stands at over 450 confirmed sites, spread across more than 5,000 square miles. And in the past 2 years alone, a new LiDAR survey project called Amazfania Revelada identified roughly 10 times more structures than researchers had previously believed existed in the entire region. Scientists involved in that project called it the most significant discovery in the history of Amazonian archaeology. What the geoglyphs prove is close to the exact opposite of what everyone assumed for centuries. Radiocarbon dating places their construction between 2,500 years ago, built by a society researchers have named the Aquari, who spent generations shaping this landscape, clearing selective patches of forest, likely for ceremonial gatherings, and managing the surrounding bamboo and forest ecosystem so carefully that it survived largely intact for nearly 2,000 years after they stopped adding to it. This was not virgin wilderness untouched by human hands, the image every textbook clung to for a century. It was cultivated, engineered, and inhabited by a civilization sophisticated enough to leave a permanent geometric signature on the land itself, one so well integrated into the ecosystem that satellites couldn't detect it until the trees came down. And that is exactly where the story turns from a triumph into a race against time. Because the same activity that revealed the geoglyphs in the same decades is also erasing them. Along a 330-mile stretch of highway that researchers grimly nicknamed the Geoglyph Highway, farmers have plowed straight through at least 11 separate ancient sites while expanding soy, corn, and sugar operations, sometimes without ever realizing what they'd destroyed until the shape was already gone. One landowner, when confronted about a site leveled on his property, was still employing the same farm manager responsible for it. So think about what that means. Every discovery on this list before now, the buried garden cities of the Singu, the lidar, scanned pyramids of Bolivia, the drought, exposed faces on the Rio Negro, the anaconda that spent 2 centuries hiding under someone else's name. Every one of them survived specifically because the Amazon kept them hidden. The geoglyphs are different. They're being found and lost in the same generation, sometimes within the same year. And there is no guarantee the next 450 sites will still exist by the time anyone gets the chance to properly study them. For 500 years, the story told about the Amazon was simple: an empty green wilderness, too hostile and too poor in soil to have ever supported real civilization, populated only by scattered, wandering bands who left nothing behind worth finding. Every discovery on this list says otherwise. There were cities here, planned, engineered, and inhabited by tens of thousands of people, with roads and canals and defensive walls, built by societies sophisticated enough to shape an entire ecosystem around their own survival. There were predators here that modern science didn't even confirm until 2024. There is history here old enough to have been painted by people who once stood beside animals the size of small cars, animals that have been extinct for 10,000 years. The truth is that the Amazon was never empty. It was hiding. And the unsettling part is that most of what is on this list wasn't found because someone finally looked hard enough. It was found because something else happened first. A drought dried out a river. A logging operation cleared a hillside. A film crew went looking for snakes and stumbled onto a new species instead. The rainforest has been giving up its secrets almost entirely by accident, one disaster or one act of destruction at a time. Which raises the only question that actually matters now. How much is still down there, still hidden, that we'll never get the chance to find? Because the thing that would have revealed it also destroyed it first. Percy Fawcett spent his life, and eventually gave his life, searching for a city that turned out to be real. He was a century too early, and a few hundred miles off course. Somewhere out there, right now, there is a version of that same story still waiting to happen. A discovery big enough to rewrite everything we think we know about this place. The only question is whether we find it before the Amazon loses it for good.